So whether it is goods or whether it is investment, go back to Youngstown, go back to Akron, your home base.
Yeah.
Is this adding jobs or taking jobs away from Ohio?
Well, I think it's hard to tell at this point. In some instances, the Chinese tariffs on steel we're hearing, are going to open up some steel mills because it's leveling the playing field. China is subsidizing their industry. Their final product landing on the shores in the United States is the same product as the steelmaker's raw material costs just starting the process in a place in western PA or Ohio. So it's leveling that playing field a little bit. With the technology piece, I'm not sure, but I think it is something that we really need to look into. China has a full-throated approach to trying to infiltrate the United States technology. We see it in intellectual property all the time. And so guarding investments coming into the United States, I think, is a good idea.
So with respect to Ohio, generally, we have some numbers. A study was done by a nonpartisan group in Washington about net adds and subtractions. And it says exactly what you said, which is you're going to be adding jobs in the steel industry, but you'll actually lose substantially more in other manufacturing industries because of the cost of goods sold. Mm-hmm. So does that raise a potential problem for you with your constituency when it comes to trade?
I think we're just looking for fairness. And so if the Chinese government is subsidizing an industry, then we have an obligation as the top economy in the world for now is to make sure that the law is enforced, the rules are enforced. And I think it needs to get back to enforcement. Now, what's going on with Europe and Canada and all these tariffs, I think that's a terrible idea for a variety of different reasons. Now we're hearing today about Harley-Davidson. That's exactly what's going to happen. I was at a steel mill in Warren, Ohio last week. They can potentially lose a lot of jobs there, a couple hundred jobs there, because they get their steel from Europe. And the tariffs are going to potentially reduce the workforce there. So you're seeing these tariffs against allies and people who have similar environmental laws, similar human rights laws, similar labor laws. We should compete fairly with them without these tariffs.
It's just that uncertainty, isn't it? I mean, President Trump says that all of this is part of broader trade negotiations. But what does it do to business sentiment and potentially some firms that do want to invest in your state when you're waging wars against not only China, but also allies? Yeah,
you know, the number one state that's going to get hurt by these tariffs with Canada is going to be Ohio, and then Michigan, because of those integrated supply chains, especially around auto. This is a presidency of uncertainty every single day. And the problem I really have with the president more than anything else is all he cares about is winning the 24-hour news cycle. It doesn't matter if he needs to be with a dictator or start a fight with one of your best friends in Canada. He wants to dominate the news cycle in 24 hours. Meanwhile, China has a 10, 20, 50, 100-year plan that is whole of government. It's military, economic, political, and they're moving out into the South China Sea. They're building bases in Africa. They're coming at us. And our president is trying to win a 24-hour news cycle. Will trade be what splits the GOP and gives the Democrats an upper hand in the midterms? It may. It may. It's not, what will be the key issue? It's hard to tell. I mean, how these play out. And here's part of the problem is you don't know, because one day the tariffs are on, next day the tariffs are off. Next day we're negotiating them. Now they're back on. So there's a lot of uncertainty within the policy itself to say, hey, can Democrats grab onto this as a political issue, because it may change tomorrow.
If come November there is some disaffection among the voters with the trade policy of the Trump administration, is the Democratic Party in a good position to take advantage of that? Because historically, let's be honest, the Democrats have been more protectionist than the Republicans have been, and they've been closer to union. Are you sort of in a disadvantage in taking advantage of that? Well, I think most Democrats believe that we have to be engaged in the world. We don't want to build walls. I know it's a topic, but build walls, lock ourselves in. We know we're in a global economy. The question is, how do you plug in communities like Youngstown, Ohio, who have been left behind? And I think gave rise to the Donald Trump presidency, because while globalization and automation were happening, these communities, Flint, Michigan, Gary, Indiana, they're all across the Great Lakes and down in the South, we're left behind. So the party that can figure out how to plug these communities in, that's going to take some public investment, but it's also going to take some private investment. And Democrats can't say, oh, it's the government can do everything. We've got to find that public-private partnership blend that's going to actually drive investment into these communities. What about the balance between the two ends of Pennsylvania Avenue? Because we hear some Democrats and Republicans now saying the president's gone too far. For example, example, as you point out, with the 232, saying that Canada is a national security threat.
Yeah.
Is there a reasonable prospect of actually Congress taking back some of the authority it really has given up to the president?
I would hope so, and I hope, especially when you're dealing with our allies, is to say, look, this gets so complicated and complex because it's, well, yeah, it's economic, but it's also geopolitical, it's also military, it's also what's happening with Russia trying to destroy the NATO alliance, and then the president stepping into that, putting tariffs on our friends. It's about China and everything they're trying to do economically, and us not having a coherent policy. So I think Democrats need to be for engaging the world, but doing it in a fair way, and making sure we're investing in these companies that are communities at the end of the day that we need to re-engage and plug in to the global economy. We're left out, left behind, and have been for 30 years. And so the Democrats didn't answer the question. Republicans didn't answer the question. Here came Donald Trump peddling a lot of nonsense, but after 30 years of not getting any help, they said, I'll take a flyer on Trump.
Finally, let me just ask you about immigration, because the GOP is going to have the compromise bill voted on in the House. It does include a pathway to citizenship. Also, it would end family separations. Why do Democrats not like it?
Well, I'll have to take a closer look and see exactly what's in it, because last I heard they were making some last-minute changes. I think we need a pathway to citizenship, and we also need strong controls of the border. This is not an either-or like the president.
Does that mean that you're considering whether or not you want to vote for the
I'll look and see what it says, but I'm not going to make a commitment right here because I haven't seen it. But I think if you're talking about, you know, some reasonable border enforcement, I don't think we want to be pushing a wall. But at the end of the day, pathway to citizenship, a compassionate program for people who may be fleeing violence in a country, not just sending them back, but actually saying America still welcomes people who may be refugees or seeking asylum.